Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator.
Hello and welcome to the Polymath Polycast. All right. Hello and welcome to PolyInnovator. Whether you have joined in on the Polycast or watching on TeleInnovator, you have come to the right place for progress. Today I'm talking with Nate Peo, the host of the All-In podcast, fitness, enthusiast, and super connector. I love that term, by the way. Thank you for joining me on the Polycast and TeleInnovator.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
We're here to talk about how to stretch ourselves out of our comfort zones and being able to say yes to life and passion. In your podcast, I was actually listening to the SoloCast episode where you're talking about how it's important to keep momentum. What does that have to do with progress and passions in your own habits, do you think?
Well, I think momentum is something that can be built or it can be taken away. You know, there's always that thing of like you see, I think it was even in just, you know, the last Super Bowl. If you're familiar with sports or you like football, you know that the 49ers were dominating the first half of the game, and the second half they ended up losing the Super Bowl to the Chiefs because the Chiefs stole the momentum and they just came back. And so momentum to me is when you start building on little incremental wins and you just start steamrolling, like a snowball rolling down the hill, or like a steam train that just takes a little while to build up steam, but once it gets going, it's unstoppable. So for me, momentum is a lot of the small habits you do every single day lead to big changes. So like if you're going to say, hey, I want to change the world, and I want to go out and do this thing, and I'm going to start tomorrow, and my goals and ambitions are super big, chances are you're going to go out there and you're going to lose. You're not going to succeed at it because it's going to be too big, too fast to start. And so when you have momentum, it's more like, hey, it's small incremental changes over a long period of time provides this huge momentum shift or change of dynamics or what you're after, versus trying to do it all in one big giant step day one. And
that is a brilliant way to start off the podcast. I was thinking about how your momentum today was building up throughout your entire day. You chose to make actionable choices to really exude that progression.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. You caught me on Twitter. I just kind of woke up in a bad mood. And partly my bad mood was because I had fallen off a lot of my habits that I think ground me in success, which is getting up at the same time every day, going through a series of habits in the morning, which is usually reading, journaling, a little bit of visualization, a good time in the gym, and being like real consistent with my diet. And the reason why is I am rigid about it is because I lack a lot of willpower. And so if I fall off a little bit, I fall off a lot. So like this weekend kind of was off. And so today I woke up and I was like, I need to get back on track. And always the first day you're back on track, you're a little bit groggy, you're a little bit sluggish, you're like not in the mood for it. You want to, you know, if you're hungry, you want to take a break and go get something you shouldn't eat, some sweets, like a scone or something like that. You're like, no, I'm not doing that. And so I was just kind of in this like funk, this mood, and I wasn't really able to get out of it. And I went on to Twitter and I was like, hey, I'm going to make that's one of the things I've been trying to do more is post on Twitter, and Twitter's just kind of like the spur of the moment, whatever I'm thinking, just spit it up out there. So I was like, I'm going to spit out some snarky comment about being in a shitty mood. And my friend, Amanda Ketazari, who, she has this journal I've been following, which is all about programming your mind through daily affirmations and stuff like that. So I was like, she posted a quote that was just basically a Henry Ford quote that's like, either you think you can or you can't, you're both right. And I was like, you know what, I could choose to say my day's shitty and I'm accepting that as being a shitty day. Sorry, I'm swearing if that's not cool on your podcast. Or I could choose to say, hey, I've had a bad moment today, and I could not dwell in that moment. Like, hey, you know, just because I posted like my day's good doesn't mean my day was good. But I was like, it's going to make it, if I encourage it to be bad, it's not going to get better. So I was like, I just need to hey, either I think I can or I think I can't. Either way, I would be right. So I was like, you know what? I'm not going to post that bad comment. Like, and turns out like within about an hour, like my headache had kind of gone away, and I wasn't feeling like down in the dumps about things and a little bit frustrated. So it's just kind of like, hey, it's just interesting that it just kind of changed. Like I could have wallowed in it, and I didn't, because somebody else is reminding me to do that. And I don't think her tweet was there by accident. You know, she's somebody that kind of came into my life too, like not by accident. And these things happen. So it's kind of like a good sign.
Yeah, definitely. And it's one of those things too where your mentality on life, I think, is really helpful in that. You said you didn't have much willpower, but I don't think it's about quantity of willpower. It's just about like those small choices like that where, hey, I don't think that I'm in the right state of mind to be making this tweet or something like that. So let's take a step back and kind of reevaluate, so to speak.
Yeah, it's really not. I think most people are very similar. Like everybody, even like the greats that have accomplished amazing feats, they've had self-doubt. They've just chosen not to let it consume them. And so, you know, you just have to kind of, if you have in a bad moment, you acknowledge it, put it away, and then move on. And you guys start thinking about your why, your what's driving you to do what you want to do. So, you know, if my why right now was like, hey, I'm indifferent to my health and fitness, then if I want to make a poor choice, it's not in alignment with my things. It's easy to hey, screw it, you know, tomorrow's another day. But if it's very rigid, like, hey, my why is very important, then I think your discipline gets a little bit stronger and you're able to overcome the setbacks that you might have otherwise not done, which to me is just consistency over time produces bigger results than trying to do big things some of the time.
Well, and it's interesting you say that. I was recording a podcast yesterday with somebody, and the similarity in mindsets between all three of us and just how we're all trying to better ourselves. And I think that's also kind of what matchmaker people on there are kind of the same mentality too. We're people who want to expand horizons, which is why we got to that new platform, so to speak. And
Right.
I think your podcast itself, being all in on the experiences you have, is very important. And I love that momentum and progression mindset you have.
Well, thank you. And the reason why I chose to do a podcast was kind of this idea behind, like you said, self-improvement and betterment. And, you know, a lot of times people post motivational quotes. And when I do that, I don't necessarily think I'm saying this motivational message to you because I think you're not getting it. Like you need to get out there and do more stuff. I'm saying it to me. Like I'm posting this because I'm thinking about it. And it's the message I want to say to myself. So the podcast was this idea of, hey, if you wanted to, like every time I've ever wanted to do something big and grand, I've always gotten self-doubt, insecurities held me back from something. And I was like, you know what, this time I'm going to do it differently. This time I'm going to push past that uncomfortable feeling no matter what, because like I'm sane enough to know it's not going to kill me to post, you know, goals and ambitions up on the internet. So why not just do that? Anybody else that's, you know, done big things, they've done it. So why can't I do it? Why am I any different? Instead of saying, oh, that's for somebody else to do, say, hey, why don't I try it? Why don't I push past it and see what happens? And that kind of led to the podcast, which was this idea of like, I was trying to figure out like, what would I make a podcast show about?
Right.
And I liked the idea of networking. I like meeting people, and I like it when you connect with somebody and there's a ton of energy and you feel like, hey, together we're kind of like rising everybody to the top. We're all super excited about something and we want to chase the best version of ourselves possible. I was like, you know, that would be kind of this interesting concept of a podcast to do, is record that, because that's where I get a lot of fulfillment. It's something I could put out there. And the idea of a podcast also was, hey, if you have one, you're going to be able to connect with people you might not have otherwise connected with. Like, you know, clearly I wouldn't have met you if I didn't do a podcast, because I wouldn't have been on the website where I would have met you, and I wouldn't have been on this podcast. But not only that, but like if there's somebody that like I really would love to get on a phone call and chat with and pick their brain about, if I just said, hey, I'm going to call you up get on a phone call with you, they're probably not even going to message back. But if you said,
Right.
hey, I got a podcast and you want to come on and talk about what you got going on, they might not say yes, but there's a reason for them to say yes versus just like, hey, I'm trying to get something from you. So I was kind of like, hey, the podcast is this idea of having a bigger voice, a bigger uncomfortable moment. So what, like, anytime it's just started feeling like uncomfortable, I was like, okay, now I have to do it. If I have to ask somebody if I should do it, then that means I have to do it. So that's where the podcast came around, and it kind of, the all in was this idea of, hey, you're not going to quit because you're uncomfortable. You're going to do it for a set amount of time. And I'm not advocating doing something stupid that I hate for the rest of my life, but do it for a period long enough that you didn't quit for the wrong reasons. You didn't quit because it was uncomfortable one day and it wasn't meant to be, but like, hey, you did like 100 episodes and you learned a lot about yourself, and you learned you didn't like it or you did like it. And turns out I'm liking it a lot.
Oh yeah.
It's been a ton of fun. So, but there's points early in the process when we were talking about recording equipment before we started recording, where I've screwed up like 3 episodes when I first started recording because I couldn't even get the recorded on the audio to turn on. Like I recorded the video, but not the audio on like 3 podcast episodes. Old me would have said, that's too much effort. Like, you don't need this stress in your life. Just abandon it. Just go this other way. And I was like, if I didn't have a bigger why, I might have quit at that point. But I was like, you know what? You knew that there was going to be hardships. You knew that the path wasn't going to be easy. You just didn't know what they were. And these are those obstacles that you expected. So get over them. There's going to be more, and do it. And yeah, that's kind of been the idea behind All In.
I love that. It's one of those things where the challenges is going to be hitting you left and right. You're going to get punched in the face, but how you respond to that is going to be the very crucial aspect, like you're saying. I resonate with your technical problems. Over the past couple of years, through my podcasts, videos, even some blogging, I've had a lot of technical issues. At one point, my website completely broke. At one point, my condenser mic, like you have there, I was having clipping issues with it. I had to end up getting a new mic myself. Hopefully yours is better, so we don't have that issue. And then on top of that, just even my webcam melting, like basically not literally, but on the visuals, just geometric shapes, that kind of thing. And just getting past those hurdles was definitely hard. But we both had that why and that passion to be like, hey, let's get past it.
Yep, for sure.
So I guess you kind of already answered this, but what does it mean to get in your own way, so to speak?
Getting in your own way is this idea that you're holding yourself back, but you're telling yourself a different story. Like, it's a limiting belief. Like you explain to yourself why you can't do something. And chances are it's made up. It's a self-imposed thing. And so when you start thinking about, hey, say you want to go up and give a speech in front of a crowd of people, even if it's 10 people, and you say, okay, that's nerve-wracking. What are they going to say? What are they going to think? What if I say my whole speech and I mess up some words? And you're creating this idea in your head of like, why all this stuff that's going to be wrong, it could go wrong, all this other stuff. But when you go and you watch somebody give a speech, you don't pay that close attention to it. You just kind of go, hey, that person got up. There's also this implied assumption of that person as being an expert in what they're there to talk about. So you're kind of giving them a lot of benefit of the doubt anyways, that you're not giving yourself. And then when you walk away from the speech, you don't remember every word about it. You just kind of remember like the concept of it, some key takeaways, and like some points to carry on, and maybe some energy about it, and if you enjoyed the speech or not. And so it's like, hey, people aren't paying that close of attention to what you're doing anyways. So if you have it in your head that all this crazy stuff's going on, or people don't think you're an expert, or you're not thinking you're good enough, like, you got to start somewhere. And going back to anybody that's done anything great, no matter what it is, they all started with day one. Like, nobody had 1 million followers on their Instagram on the first day. Nobody climbed Mount Everest without showing up at the base camp to begin with. So like, you have to just kind of, you have to, I like to say, you have these limiting beliefs, and you have to ask yourself better questions around them and say, hey, instead of asking like, am I good enough? Well, why do you think you're not good enough? And change that to say like, you're on it. Like, I'm not good enough to have a podcast. Okay. Well, why aren't you good enough? Well, I've never done it before. And you say, no, change your limiting belief to say, hey, I'm good enough to learn how to do a podcast and express myself along the course of the way, and it will get better over time. So that to me is getting in your own way. It's just stupid thinking that goes on, and just kind of like, hey, overcome it. It's the only way to do it. It's going to be there, but don't let it hold you back.
Yeah, definitely. And they say that a lot of podcasts stop after like the 20th episode because they either have some limiting belief or they just fail to keep up the consistency. And it's one of those things too, where if you can keep that going, on top of that, you're talking about how your why is what really brought you into podcasting. Even if you stop after 100 episodes, you have that history behind you, and that might lead you to some sort of speaking gig or some kind of new change in your life that'll be positive.
Mm-hmm. And I think, when you're starting anything, and like the podcast, for example, is you might say, hey, I want to do a podcast show and I want it to be an hour long and I want to do it 3 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
And, you say, hey, my why is to figure it out, do it long enough to decide if I like it. And at the end of the, you say, I'm going to do it for 100 episodes. And you do 100 episodes and you say, hey, that was, okay, I liked part of it, but it was too much. So what would be something that was more comfortable? I said, if I was doing 2 times a week for 10-minute interviews, I think I could have like taken some of the fluff out and just get really focused. Or you might say, you know what, I was having like great conversations. I wish they could have been longer. So maybe I want to go every other week, but I want to have a 3-hour podcast and get really depth and stuff like that. So you have to be open to to expand on your idea and just kind of like go into it long enough to know what you like and what you don't like. Be willing to realize that the journey is going to evolve and be flexible, go where it wants to go, and experiment and find what brings you the passion and happiness about it. That could be anything, not just a podcast.
Right. Definitely. Any aspect of life, and just kind of how you portray yourself, and just also just kind of how you think about it. You're my 4th guest on this podcast, and thank you for being on it, by the way.
Well, thank you.
And it's interesting how just being as a host changes the dynamic. I had to learn how to onboard people, make sure that I'm able to convince them like, hey, this is worth it for you, kind of be not salesy in a way, but almost like, hey, this is why you should come onto a podcast kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And just understanding how the dynamic is, like, I have to make sure we have enough questions, make sure, like you said, the timing. Like the other day, I had a podcast that ended up only being about 36 minutes when it could have been easily an hour. Or I had my first one with a guest was an hour and 40 minutes when it could have probably been more like an hour and a half or something like that.
I had the same thing. Like you get people on that you think are going to be really great guests and people like you converse really well with, and you find like, oh, a conversation is different than a podcast. People put the camera on, all of a sudden they're nerve-wracking. And then people like, I don't even know who this person is, and I'm going to be on the phone with them for an hour. Like, what are we going to talk about? And then they come on and you're like, oh my God, that was like the most amazing conversation I ever had, because they just came prepared to just, I'm here to talk. So.
Right. Well, and one thing I told myself actually just like a year ago, before I was even doing any kind of interviews or discussions with people like you on the podcast, I was just doing it by myself, the solo casts. I told myself, if I have a guest, I'm going to make sure I do some research and make sure I have at least a dozen questions and be prepared knowing about that person, at least to a point I can keep a conversation.
Yeah, you had a big list of questions for me. I was like, wow, these aren't even canned questions. I thought they were, like, when I first started reading them, I was like, they must be just canned. Nope, they're well thought out questions.
Well, thank you. How did your mentorship in your life help you get past your low point in your 30s? You're talking about.
Yeah, so like to me, a mentor kind of gives you some guidance of what you want to do. When I was in my 30s, I was probably a bit lost on like what I wanted to accomplish. And finding a coach or a mentor to kind of give you guidance where you want to go with your life helps out. The mentor I'm probably referring to is a professor of mine that I had in grad school. And he was actually a strategic marketing coach. And I had this business that wasn't very successful, but he had this idea. Well, was it really his idea? But what he taught was, when you're running a business, you have you want to kind of set it up so that if you're on a deserted island and somebody dropped you a message once a day of where your business was at, you could figure out if it was doing right or doing not very quickly. And there's so much information that you really can't get all of it and make a detailed analysis. So think about if you go to triage, like they don't go, you look like you're having a heart attack, go over here. You look like you're having your appendix come out. Yeah, they come in, they take your blood, your vitals. And what it does is it starts identifying, okay, if everything's working right, we're good. If one thing's off, it's going to lead to more questions down this road. So you don't have to go figure out if your appendix is rupturing, do you need stitches in your toe? Like clearly you don't. Like so like that's the idea behind it, is it's kind of pinpointing the direction where to go. So you pick like 5 or 6 key performance indicators, and you track those, and you say, and so if these 5 things are happening every single day, the chances are your business is operating successfully, which it may not, it may solve problems, but it should be a sign. So if like the ones I always do is like, okay, what's your sales to closing ratio? So if you're saying, hey, if I want to do $1 million in sales this year, but my closing ratio is 1 to 10. So if I gotta quote $10 million to sell $1 million. Okay. So if I get to the end of the year and I go, did I sell $1 million or not? And I was only quoting $2 million, like clearly I'm not going to get there. So that's like what you kind of track along the way. Like, hey, if this is down, this is also going to be down. So I got to get that up. So that like really helped me kind of focus my business a little bit better, management efficiency wise. And then also it was about storytelling. And the other part of it that's really stuck with me a lot longer is the idea of storytelling and knowing who your customer really is. And so when you're telling when you're giving a sales pitch, you're not really giving a sales pitch. You're telling a story that people find compelling, and a reason why they find value in you. So those are like 2 things that really helped me in my 30s revolve around this business idea that like, hey, that just kind of applies to anything, any endeavor you're at that you have passion about. Like you can apply those to anything. And when you do that, chances are you're going to be able to start figuring out when things are going wrong and figure out a way to make it a little bit better.
And seeing things in the macro view, so to speak. So what you're saying is kind of making sure you're paying attention to different interacting parts of the business and understanding how they work and how they're related to each other.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's a lot of, it's just data, if your sales to marketing ratios, or are you producing enough widgets to make enough widgets, those type of things. So like you're just kind of keeping an eye on things, that if something's not operating correctly, then you dive deeper into what the problem would be. So it's really a way of just kind of not getting so burdened with the weeds every single day, but pay attention to the big stuff. When the big stuff starts not looking right, you can dive down into the weeds to solve the problem.
Yeah, definitely. And just making sure that you're not getting too caught up in the macro, but not too caught up in the micro either. And one thing I was going to say is that the segue between what our previous conversation and that question was terrible, but you managed to tell a beautiful story. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, your perspective on that and how your mentorship really kind of guided you towards that certain strategy. And I think that's really kind of guiding you through your podcast too. From the episodes I saw, it seems like that's kind of what you're embodying in that.
Well, thank you. I'm trying to kind of express a consistent, story of how my circumstances shaped my life, and get other people's take on it and learn from them as well. Cause we always should be learning and try to take something away, something good away.
If you could learn from anybody, who would it be in life?
Oh, that's I'd say I like to be around The Rock, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Yeah. And I think, and I'm not like a super Dwayne "The Rock" nerd geeked out fan. I just admire his work ethic of just like, you look at him, you go, I want to have like his lifestyle, his career, but he actually is like one of these people that takes and puts the effort into it. And I love hearing his stories of being, somebody that was on the path to being a superstar athlete and not making it in football and having to pivot to wrestling, but then just saying, hey, I made it to a high level of success in wrestling, but then become like the highest paid movie actor in the world. And people don't get to that level of success without really the effort. Him and Kevin Hart, there's a bunch of other people that I think if you really follow what they do, it's like from the moment they get up to the moment they're done working everything, they find a way to fit everything in. And I just love that they don't make excuses for it. So, a lot of us go, hey, I'm busy with work, so I can't make time for my family, or I can't make time for my health and fitness. And they just find a way to cram it in. I think there'd be a lot to learn from just being around that for like a week. You'd be like, I'm minuscule compared to the effort these guys are putting in. And like, I could do more for sure.
Well, if we were to put one of their effort days in every week, we would do massively way more than our peers. And it's interesting how you mentioned Kevin Hart too, because I was thinking that like him and The Rock both are just extremely hardworking, and it's insane their ethic.
Yeah,
they're friends too, no less.
It's crazy.
I actually heard you mentioning Gary Vaynerchuk in one of your podcasts.
Yeah, Gary's very, very similar to him as well.
Yeah, that all the kind of hustle mentality, so to speak.
Yes.
So how do you personally get yourself kind of reared to go, getting that mindset of like, hey, I need to get stuff done?
I'm a list person. I make a to-do list, and I like crossing things off the list, and I like adding more things. So I usually have a notebook. I'm a pen and pencil kind of person. Even if I put it in like a notes, a platform, a voice memo, it tends to need to get written on a piece of paper, and then I like to rewrite the list every single day. Just something about that, carrying it forward. Maybe it's resetting it. Like if you have, 5 or 6 things and you've crossed off 3 or 4, like I don't want to be working off a piece of paper that's just this like constant huge list. So I kind of do that. I try to keep my list to 5 to 10 things that I'd like to get done for the day. And I'd rather be at 5 than 10, because I know if I write down 5, I'll probably write down 5 other things throughout the day to it. And I don't want to be carrying forward like a 15 to 20 item list. And usually what ends up happening is like, if I'll look back like a month prior and I'll be like, oh, here's a bunch of stuff I had written on my list I thought it was important to get done, and life happens and it turns out it's not as important, and whatever. So, or other times like, hey, that was a good idea, I need to bring this back and put it back on the list too.
Probably make it easier to go back to as well.
It does. I was just going to say, and then it's out of my head. Like, like the worst is like when you're out and about and you have an idea and it comes to you and you're just like thinking about it and stewing on it. And it's like, you're doing that because you're afraid you're going to lose it. So if you write it down, you've safeguarded it, and you can come back to it,
Well, that mental dump, so to speak. I was thinking about the psychology of what you're saying too. The notepad taking, the physical act of writing it makes you remember it so much more clearer than if you were to type it, or even just like say a voice memo, like you're saying. Yeah. And it's interesting how you transfer it each day. That I did not see before. I've seen a lot of productivity videos, but they never carried it over. They didn't roll it over, so to speak. So that's cool. It's a good advice there.
It helps me remember like why it's like another touch point of like thinking through, if you put it down, is it important or is it not important? And makes you kind of, if you write it down 3 or 4 times in a row, like you got to ask yourself, why am I not getting this done? Is it because I don't want to, or because I don't need to? I'm
not much of a to-do list person because I've been kind of lazy at it, and I'm changing my mindset. Like we talked about earlier, trying to change, like I am a list person. I need to make sure I do that so I can get something done. Literally about an hour before our chat today, I made a list of the new stuff I needed to do. Go edit an old video, work on the email marketing setup, and all these different things I needed to do. A list of like 10 items too, like you were saying. And it's probably going to it's going to grow bigger and bigger as I go, unless I can get things done or short it down. What can I cut out?
Yep, exactly.
So tell me about the All In podcast with the mindset of that, what we've been talking about. Like, how do you get that going? How do you set it up? Just anything.
Well, the All In podcast, like I said before, it was a bit of this idea of when you met somebody and you had a conversation with them, like over a beer or over coffee. I always thought that was interesting. Like, and I would leave conversations going, man, I got a ton of energy out of that. I thought we talked about some cool ideas. The ideas that we came up with weren't ideas I would have had on my own. They were brought together by bringing people in the same room. And so, Gary Vee has always talked about like, hey, if he could go back and do it all over, he would just documented everything, like the whole journey. Like that's what your content should be. It shouldn't just be your highlight reel. It should be like everything you're doing. So I was like, what could I document? And I was like, that would be something cool to document. So when I created the All In podcast, it was I actually considered calling it Happy Hour or something to that effect. I mean, a lot of people had that name too, so it kind of was a blessing in disguise that it wasn't like the only one there, because I was gonna go meet somebody at a bar or at a coffee shop and just have a conversation with them and record it. And it turns out when you're trying to get started with a podcast, like you got to find guests. And if you're going to meet somebody to do a podcast, especially when you're starting out, I wanted it to be convenient for them. So I didn't want to say, hey, drive, and I'm in California, so you have to drive to go anywhere. So it was, hey, drive 45 minutes to come have a coffee with me to record it. So I was like, okay, I will come to you. Okay, now I'm going to drive 45 minutes to somewhere I'm not familiar with, get there early enough to find a coffee shop that I could set up that's good enough to meet in, but not too loud that there's all these distractions. And like very quickly I realized the logistics of doing this regularly wasn't going to really pan out. And I didn't really want to go invest in a bunch of money to rent an office space and set up like this faux coffee shop. It was like, oh my God, like this isn't going to pan out as I had hoped. I guess I'll do video podcasts, which turned out to be I think easier anyways, because most people are on Zoom. It was easy to record. I was like, oh, and then, the current situation, the COVID situation happened, and I was, forced to be on Zoom meetings anyway. So it just kind of like rolled right into it. Yeah. And it's become very, very familiar. It's comfortable. So that's what the All In podcast evolved to be. And to me, I was like thinking, what would it be about? And it was going to be about networking, building personal relationships, and this idea behind myself of like, I'm going to get there. I'm going to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. I don't necessarily have a defined goal. Like a lot of people say, make a goal of where you want to go with things, what it's going to do. I'm like, it's not a goal. It's a journey. The podcast is a tool, a vessel to cast a bigger net, to meet more people, to spread the word, and also to connect like people within your network. You want to connect them with other people in your network. So it's a chance to share the people I meet, their stories with other people. So this All In idea was like, hey, I'm just going to go all in on this concept of what happens when you meet a lot of people and you put in effort over time, sustained amount of time. And if you know that you're going to overestimate what you're going to do in a year, so you're going to be pissed off and frustrated that you didn't get as many listens and as follows of the first year, but in year 5, if you stuck with it, whatever you think would be a big number in your head, you're going to outdo it, and you're going to blow your mind away of where things would go and the opportunities you might meet people or get introduced to. Like you're going to be like flabbergasted. So I was just like, that's what All In is to me, is just, hey, I'm just going to do, I'm going to say yes to almost anything, and just see where it goes. And the journey will kind of shape, and it'll become more focused and narrow the further along we go. Things will make sense that didn't make sense to begin with, and things I thought were going to be the answer will turn out to be not the answer, and we'll figure out as we go. But I'm not going to let waiting to figure it all out happen. We're just doing it.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like you actually have a goal in mind where it may not be a very concrete goal, but it's a bit more of a macro goal, kind of in the clouds. Like, hey, I want to meet a lot of people, go all in on the connections, make sure it's a quality content that we make, and have a positive interaction with these people. Totally get that. And it resonates with your whole super connected kind of mentality. And even what I'm trying to be as a polymath and PolyInnovator even, and just how we want to change. We want to change ourselves. We want to change the external world around us. And we're doing it in our own right, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. Cool.
Something I just mentioned, actually, the super connector. What does that mean to you? Did you make that kind of word up, so to speak?
No. It was kind of stolen from, I don't want to use the word steal, but Gabby Bernstein, she's an author, speaker. She talks about the law of attraction, and she has a book called Super Attractor. And to me, a super connector is along those lines. And it may have just started getting in my mind when I heard super tractor, but super connector is not as, a lot of people would have heard that word before. But to me, a super connector is that person that that if you have a question, they're the person you're going to call for the answer to. Like, hey, who do we know over at this company to get introduced to? Who do we know that's a baker in that town? Like, how would I get in touch with somebody over here? They are going to be the one that knows. Like, if you like, got fired today and you're going to call up somebody and say, hey, I just got fired. Like, who do you know that's hiring? That's the person you're going to call. So
right.
To me, a super connector, it just has a ton of people in their network, but they're very authentic about it too. When they make connections with people, it's not about collecting cards. It's not about what people can do for them. It's really this whole idea of they serve as many people as they possibly can. And they're constantly looking for ways to help people within their network. So, if you said to me like, hey, I just moved to town and I really, can't find a good dentist, I'd be like thinking, who do I know that's a dentist in your town? And I might not know anybody in your town that's a dentist, but I might know somebody that knows the right person. So that's why I just kind of, super connector is always thinking, how can they match make? Like, of all sorts of things, like, oh, this person's single, that person's single, they'd be great. Let's get them like connected. Maybe they'll date, or this person's looking for a job and this person would be the perfect candidate for it. Like, let me make that introduction. So you're just always kind of seeing that. And so to be a super connector, you also have to be constantly meeting new people. You have to love meeting people because you want to engage with them. You want to find out what they're about. And you want to be like, just make them feel like they're the only person in the world. And then when you leave, you're just thinking like, what do I know that I could help them out with today? But a lot of times that doesn't happen for years to come. It's somebody that will come into your life at the right time and make introductions to you in the future or down the road, or they might introduce you to somebody today that you don't really going to find a use for in your life for 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road. So they're just always kind of making introductions like, hey, this person needs to be in your life. That person needs to be in your life. That's a super connector.
It's kind of like on How I Met Your Mother, Barney was always like, have you met Ted? And trying to introduce someone to, he's kind of a super connector in a way. I actually super resonate with the super connector mindset. You might not have necessarily come up with it, so to speak, but I think you're going to be the person that makes it famous. And
I hope so.
I actually see myself as one as well, because it's one of those things where, as a gregarious kind of person, I've always liked talking to people and making those connections, or just making connections at work or whatever it may be.
Yeah, that's really what a super connector is, just constantly making those connections and doing it where it feels effortlessly and people find value. It's not forced. There's nothing forced about it. It just feels organic, and it's truly given from the heart, and it's given without expectation.
Well, and I think it's too that genuine urge to help people. Something I ask my guests: what is a polymath to you? I know it's kind of a still novel concept, but
well, to be honest, I didn't know what a polymath was when we talked until I asked you, like, hey, what exactly is a polymath? To me, at first, I was like, poly sounds like people that can be in love with more than one person. So maybe that's just a little niche bit of trivia that I knew. But once you explain to me, it's kind of like a jack of all trades. A polymath is somebody that has interest in a lot of things, and they want to serve through a variety of different ways. They want to chase their passions. So to me, a polymath is somebody that's discovering who they are as a unique individual, and say, what are the things that bring me the most fulfillment? And chances are what brings most people fulfillment is how they serve others. And so when we look at things, we say, hey, I'm known for XYZ. So say like you're an insurance person and everybody knows you as Dustin, the insurance salesman. And so like, maybe I'm afraid to connect with you because, hey, you're going to try to sell me insurance, or you're going to do this, you're going to do that, or I'm going to have to tell you no. Like, there's going to be an awkward conversation. But then you start talking about how you also coach Little League and that you are, really involved in the local community and the foundation and all of a sudden I start seeing that there's other things I'm relatable to, like, oh, my kids play in the Little League, or I also serve at the foundation too. Like, all of a sudden, there's an interest that's bridged over a variety of different interests. So to me, a polymath, if you're looking to serve people and help people in a lot of aspects in a lot of different areas, maybe the old way of doing things in the 50s and 60s growing up through, our parents' time is like you had one job, one identity, and you did one thing, and everything else was just like personal life and business life were separate. I think that that's changed in the way we can serve and help as many people as we just serve in more capacities than just one identity. And that one identity is your identity. You are the only unique person that has the exact same experiences that you've had with your own views and ideas, but you can help other people on how they relate to you. So not everybody's going to have the exact same things as you, but they're going to have similar circumstances. And so if I say a message one way, I might even say the same message you're saying, but because you resonate with somebody differently than I do, it's going to resonate with them where it might have fallen on deaf ears with me. So I think that's why polymath to me is just somebody that just has a lot of interest in looking to serve and express themselves openly, that like, hey, here I am. It's all of me.
I love that. I'm glad I asked you, because I think that whole personal mindset you have around that superconnector really kind of influences your view on that polymath concept. And I think that bridge between those two concepts together is wonderful. And I think that the way you thought about it, thank you.
You're welcome.
So before we end up wrapping up today, I do want to ask you, there's a hashtag that I've been using for years that I think you'll like, #MakeAChange. And perhaps you can find some way to use it and perhaps even find somebody who can embody it in your podcast.
Yeah, I think that's a good one to do. And I think that falls in line with my mission. I'm all in is like, hey, I want to make a change in myself personally. I want to do the things that I think I'm capable of doing, live my best version of my life. And I also want to inspire other people through my actions to say, hey, if you want to do something, whatever that is, you could do it. You just have to start. And if you start and you're consistent over time, you're going to make a change. So make a change is me personally making a change, but also maybe inspiring somebody else to make a change as well.
Perfect. Couldn't say it better myself, actually. What is our call to action for the audience today?
If you want to go on over to my website, www.natepeo, it's NATEPEO.com. That's the easiest way to get connected to all my social media channels, as well as get introduced to the podcast. And from there, you can find it on your favorite platforms, Stitcher, iTunes, or Spotify. But that's where I'd go. And then that's where you can get connected with me, and feel free to reach out and say hi and tell me where you heard about me from, and support Dustin.
Yeah, thank you. Actually beat me to the next question too. It's like, where can people find you? I'll make sure I'll have links in the description too for people to go to.
Awesome. Thank you.